Welcome to the Film Trooper podcast, empowering filmmaking entrepreneurs.
Hey, welcome to the Film Trooper podcast. Yes, this is the podcast where we empower you, the filmmaking entrepreneur. And a great way to get started is to get the book, How to Make and Sell Your Film Online and Survive the Hollywood Implosion While Doing It. It's available in paperback, Kindle ebook, as well as an audiobook. And in fact, you can get the audiobook for free when you go to survivetheimplosion.com. That's survivetheimplosion.com. Hey there, and welcome to another Film Trooper podcast episode. And today I have a returning guest. It's filmmaker Thomas Lim. He's from Singapore, and he discusses with us what's it like to create projects for China and grabbing U.S. talent to help build out projects for China. I think some of it might be very interesting to you. Now, I have to apologize for the audio quality of this episode. For some weird reason, when I updated my Skype preferences, it defaulted to my computer audio and not my my nice microphone that you're hearing right now. So on my end of it, it doesn't sound that great. And then the other side of it is that for some reason, Thomas's audio kind of like bounces in and out a little bit. You can still hear it, but it's not as great as the quality is that we've had before. So I just want to give you guys heads up before that. And without further ado, here is my guest, Thomas Lim, who is in charge of all development and production over at Sun Entertainment Culture Los Angeles, here on the Film Trooper podcast. So, Thomas, it's great to talk to you again. For the listeners, we had spoken about 2.5 years ago on episode 84. So if anybody wants to go back to filmtrooper.com/84, they can listen into the first episode that we met and we talked. And that was during a time I was doing these things called Film Marketing Fridays, which were to explore online marketing strategies for filmmakers. And it was a little bit like a Q&A session. And the title of that episode was called "What is Your Unfair Advantage?" And that during that time, the idea is that in the marketing speak, they're always looking at an angle to find what makes the product or your service or your offerings unfair to your competitors. I mean, that's a good thing. Like, you want to exploit what you have as an unfair advantage. And you had just come off making a film called Roulette City. You're from Singapore, filmmaker, and you were on this cusp of like making the move to Los Angeles and wanting to know how you can exploit your unfair advantage while you're in Los Angeles. So since then, a lot's happened. So I would love to just hand over the mic to you and share with us what's transpired since the last 2.5 years since we last spoke.
Cool. Well, thank you, Scott, for having me again. I'm Thomas, and I'm from Singapore, but I live in Los Angeles now, so I'm Chinese Singaporean. Singapore is where Crazy Rich Asians was set. So that's like, so Singapore has kind of become a more popular place in America because of Crazy Rich Asians. People think about that film when they hear I'm from Singapore now. So a couple of years ago, I moved to Los Angeles, and that's when I first spoke to you, Scott, and that was a bit of a transition. I would say a bit of a hard transition to make because I'm a foreigner and I needed a visa. So ever since then, I've gotten my green card. So that's all good. And many things transpired. And at the time, I had just finished and released my first film, Roulette City. Ever since, I've made a second film called Sea of Mirrors, which has just finished. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I became the head of Sun Entertainment Culture, which is a Hong Kong company here in Los Angeles. So I'm heading operations here in Los Angeles for the company. And we're a Hong Kong company, and we have a slate of 12 projects now. I'm looking for writers, I'm looking for producers, and development is strong in Hollywood, and which is why our boss, Alex, he wants to develop his projects here, at least for the writing part.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the summary of what happened.
Yeah, no, so we can unpack that a little bit more. It's actually interesting. I saw like a Facebook post of yours sharing like an article about how Crazy Rich Asians didn't do very well in Hong Kong or in China, correct? Because of was it because it was a romantic comedy as opposed to an action movie, or what was your thoughts on that?
So my opinion of that is actually romantic comedies do really well in China, especially local Chinese romantic comedies. But my opinion of why Crazy Rich Asians didn't really do well was because of its late release. It's released like 3 months later than the US. And I think by then, the Chinese audiences who wanted to see Crazy Rich Asians might have already seen it somewhere else. Yeah. And for the longest time, we all just thought that Crazy Rich Asians was never gonna get released in China. So if I were a Chinese audience in China and I wanted to watch Crazy Rich, I would have found it somewhere else by then. 3 months is a long time. Like, they need just 3 hours to find it, actually, maybe.
Interesting. Okay, I was just curious because I thought it was an interesting. I mean, because you mentioned it so that everybody has a context in terms of the American audience to understanding where you're coming from, and then but to hear, like, that it was a hero domestic phenomenon. A lot of people loved it. It was a fun movie to watch, and it was really neat to see an all Asian cast. And I think they were really good about being all Chinese cast, if I'm correct. So it was really cool. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that also Crazy Rich Asians is not really very Chinese because it is set in Singapore. A lot of the actors are Asian Americans, and it is completely in English. And actually, there are some British Chinese and Australian Chinese in the cast members in the film. So I think that's another thing, that maybe the Chinese audience don't really relate to that as much as they thought they could have.
Interesting. I noticed that, like, the movie Black Panther, people from the African countries that went to see it, they loved it, but they all were like goofing on how bad the accents were. Yeah. So I wanted to get into what's very interesting, because we talked about, again, the first time we talked about the aspect of the unfair advantage in marketing. Yeah. And how unique it was for you to be, a Chinese Singaporean filmmaker coming to Los Angeles. So now you have something that's unique in Los Angeles. Like I said, it was a little difficult being, getting your green card and working as a foreigner in the United States. But I think it's fascinating because I see through your Facebook posts, I would love to unpack a little bit more, if you can, whatever you can reveal to us in terms of your meetings with Netflix. What it is that Sun Entertainment culture in Los Angeles, what they are looking for in terms of development, and what has your venture been, being basically overall in charge of that division, and just sort of give an insight for other filmmakers to kind of live vicariously through you in that respect.
Sure. So speaking of the unfair advantage, I think I made full use, and I made good use of that in 2018 when that was how I landed this job, because this job needed me to speak Chinese and also to understand Chinese and be in LA, sort of know the American Hollywood culture, and also someone who's culturally kind of similar to the people in the Hong Kong headquarters, essentially our boss Alex. So I fit all that, and Alex is a close friend of mine even before we started working together, so that was trust already. So that worked out really well for me. And I think it's the best opportunity I could find here in LA, because I think I'm quite sure I'm a little bit too old for an entry-level job at a Hollywood studio, and people my age have had a lot of Americans my age would have had a lot of Hollywood experience, which I do not, because I'm coming from another culture, I'm coming from another world. So in that sense, like thinking back to the first time we spoke, I think I made good use of my unfair advantage of being Chinese and being here in Hollywood.
Yeah. And let me ask you, when you made Roulette City, what sort of things, what kind of doors opened? Just because since you made it, what things were there doors open that you didn't think would be open, unforeseen doors that kind of led you down this path to Sun Entertainment culture?
So actually, Roulette City was my first film. It led to me making a second film called Sea of Mirrors, also set in Macau. So Macau is a territory of China. And when I was making Sea of Mirrors, during post-production, I ran out of money, as many productions do. So I wrote a proposal to try to raise post-production funds, and this proposal actually landed in the hands of my boss, Alex, and that was how we met. Yeah.
Well, I think it's fascinating because, of late, the past two guests I've had on the podcast, there's like a different perspective after these years, is that sometimes I look at films, a lot of filmmakers, when they finish it, they're like, well, what do I do? Am I going to the film markets to try to sell it, trying to get a distribution deal? And then after that's done, then whatever people that I owe, financiers, they're just part of the system that maybe they'll get paid back or maybe they won't. But then I'm on to my next project, which I have to leverage my old project on to say, hey, I need to raise money for the next project. And it's interesting because there's sort of like a mindset of perhaps when you make a film, you don't necessarily have to get it to the audience right away, in a sense that maybe one of your first films out there could be used as leverage to market it to influencers or other like producers that may want to hire you or work with you in some other capacity, maybe as a director or a writer for another project they have in the works. And it's interesting kind of how that worked, because as you were getting funding for Sea of Mirrors, that you said that it opened up a relationship because somebody saw what you were doing, and there was then this opportunity of, would you like to be overall in charge with this our Los Angeles division? And I think that's important for other people to listen to, because it's like there's you have to start someplace. You got to create something, because once you create something, you never know what doors it opens, and flipping the concept of what our films are about or how we market them or the value that they have might be a lot different than just the straightforward, we made a film, we have to get it to the audience. Maybe there's something else to it that has value that maybe you can think about. What have you seen in terms of other filmmakers? Because now that you're in charge of like development per se, these meetings are happening in Netflix. Again, I don't know how much you can divulge for us, but can we live vicariously through you what it's like to go to a meeting in Netflix and what the vision, like, because obviously not all Netflix meetings are the same and not all with the same executives, but what's your takeaway on that?
So actually, I've met a lot of people. I started doing this late in the summer last year, and then I've met, I would say, like more people over the past 5 months than the last 5 years, something like that, because now I represent the company, meet them, and the doors are slightly more open to me. I've not only met Netflix, I've met the big agencies in Hollywood. I've met a couple of studios, and I pitched to them. I introduced to them my projects, and and we talk about potential collaboration, and they're interested in the Chinese market. As much as Hollywood is a little bit skeptical of Chinese market now, but they're still very interested in the Chinese market. So basically during the meetings, I show them my projects and I tell them what I need for the projects. I have 12 projects of a higher priority than 5 others. They are mainly of the action genre. There's one romantic comedy. There's one comedy. So far, no horror, but I think a horror is coming because horror doesn't sell in China. So our first and foremost target audience is the Chinese audience, because that's our specialty. We have co-invested and be the main investor in 40 films over the past 7 years in Chinese films. And that's how we learned how to make films, the company. That's how they learned how to make films back then. And a couple of years ago, we started to become the main investor of our own films, and we have created a franchise called SPL. So SP and L stands for 3 different Chinese words. Made 3 films of SPL right now, and we are thinking of making more. We want to make more, and SPL can take. I mean, the films of SPL can take place like anywhere in the world. It could take place here in America. So we're looking for writers to do all that, and because we are at the time and still now we're new in Hollywood, so we need referrals. We talk to agents. We talk to our friends in the industry. That some of them were referred to us by our Hong Kong friends in the Hong Kong industry. So in Hong Kong, like, everyone knows of us. We are seen as, in my opinion, we are seen as a real up-and-comer because of the young energy that we bring to our films and the fearlessness that our boss Alex brings to his approach in working with people, and that I think the industry, at least in Hong Kong and in China, really appreciate. And all Chinese audiences know the SPL franchise, so the Hollywood side would need to do a little bit of research to know that we are legit, because that's what they're worried about. Art. And once they're convinced of that, they start sending us their writers. We read samples and we hear pitches from them, and then we start to hire them. So it's been the past 5 months have been a lot of learning. It's been a steep learning curve for me, because I've never produced somebody else's films. I've only produced my own film so far, but now I'm in charge of producing these 12 films. So basically that's what transpired. And meeting Netflix was actually happened in Singapore.